So now I'm going to be handing things over to our presenters today. We have Catherine Dunbar, who is CQL's Vice President of Services and Systems Excellence, and Elizabeth Sykes, who is CQL's Director of Organizational Excellence. Catherine, Elizabeth, I hand things over to you.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Seth. And hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Like Seth said, my name is Elizabeth Seitz, and I am joined today by Miss Catherine Dunbar. So we like to start every webinar by introducing CQL's mission and vision. Our vision is, of course, a world of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people. Our mission is that we are dedicated to the definition, the measurement, and the improvement of personal quality of life. Currently, CQL accredits more than 470 organizations across 25 U.S. states, Canada, and Ireland. This includes the state of Tennessee's Intellectual and Developmental Disability Service System and all North and South Dakota providers. Now, there are many benefits to accreditation with CQL, some of which are seen on this slide. Most importantly is the positive impact that the partnership with CQL can have on people receiving services through improved service provision. Additionally, CQL accreditation is a partnership where resources are shared and there is an external validation of not only the opportunities within an organization, but the strengths as well. Now, I'll turn it over to Catherine to get us started talking about red flags. Catherine?
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to discuss what can be considered red flags. And first, we're going to start that by defining them, because you kind of have to know what we mean when we talk about this. So, typically when we talk about red flags, we're talking about warning signs of a deeper issue. So they can be representative of systems, practices, administrative issues, and they can certainly have a negative impact on people. Not only on the people receiving services, but people in the community, your staff, it could be anybody associated with the organization. So we want to make sure that when we discuss red flags, that there's a clear understanding that anything that's a red flag we should be digging a little bit deeper into whatever the issue is. So throughout the webinar, we'll be giving you some examples, but we'll also be giving you some ideas on ways to prevent or to address any red flags that you may have. So let's talk about some of the potential causes of some red flags that we see with organizations. And again, we'll be going into much more detail as we progress. But one of the causes that we see in our accreditation work is when the organizational culture just isn't meshing, where the culture is fragmented, or there are lots of different silos within an organization. Their values aren't matching the mission and vision of the organization. Another cause is financial instability or misuse of funds. Things like this create a sense of uncertainty and sometimes panic within an organization if there's financial instability. Obviously, if you are worried about what is if you're making next payroll, there's some underlying issues that you're going to have to address. Some organizations, have a definite lack of policies or procedures and ways to do things. There's not enough employee training or professional development, or it's not in the right places. So, a lot of times agencies respond to concerns with training, but sometimes that's not necessarily, they're not training to the root cause of what that problem could be. So it's making sure that training is appropriate, is actually addressing any issues that the organization may have. Some governance issues that could be causes is when you have leadership's reactive rather than proactive, usually through a lack of long-term planning is why it can be reactive. A lack of, solid systems and practices are another concern when it comes to reactive leadership. If the leadership is disconnected, if leadership is very busy, uh, you know, growing the organization or, doing other things, and they're not really in touch with the actual mission, what's going on the ground floor of that organization, what the work's really like. If there's a conflict of interest with, a board member or leadership or anyone really, it could lead to exploitation or bullying, things like that. Or if there's an overall lack of due diligence. And this tends to happen when, leadership or others are kind of burying their head in the sands and not really wanting to address the issues at hand. They just hope it will all go away. So you want to make sure that you're not just avoiding the problems. Some potential indicators of red flags is a big one, and this is really for any type of issue within an organization. So oftentimes it boils down to ineffective communication. So making sure that organizations are communicating both within the layers of the organization and also with the community at large. So their communication, so people know what's going on and what to expect within the organization. A lack of transparency, it could also be an indicator. If we're going into an organization and they're not telling us the whole story, or if we sense something is being left unsaid when it's something that we should really know about. If the organization is not being transparent within its own structure, if they're not, again, the lack of communication and being fully transparent with their employees. High employee turnover. We do realize that it is very difficult to keep staff. If it's higher than usual, or if there's a spike in employee turnover, that's something that you should definitely be looking into to figure out the cause of why the turnover may be high within the organization or with a certain program. If there's a lot of complaints, especially if those complaints aren't being resolved to a person's satisfaction. So if you're getting, complaints about the same issue and you thought you resolved it, what's really going on there? Could that be indicative of something deeper? If satisfaction survey rates are low, this goes hand in hand with the complaints. If people just aren't happy or if they don't feel valued, that's definitely an indicator of some potential red flags. If you've got a lot of injuries, a lot of safety issues, really, injuries, med errors, near misses, accidents, things like that are going on within the organization. If there's a lack of adequate reporting, when we go into an organization and they say, oh, we don't have any incident reports, that raises some eyebrows, because why are things not being reported? Accidents happen. So why aren't they being reported? That's definitely, something you'd want to look into. And then clearly, if there are some ongoing safety issues or other environmental concerns that just aren't being resolved, or they just, keep happening. So all that's great, right? Cool, Kate, let's talk more about the bad stuff. So now we're going to talk about good stuff. How do you make sure that you can prevent these things from happening? We don't have a magic answer. There's lots of different things that an organization can do to just become strong and ensure that they are really focusing on the quality of their services. And one of the best things that you can do is to have a very strong mission, vision, and values. And you want to make sure that those mission, vision, and value statements align with what best practices are. If you haven't updated your mission statement in 50 years, it's probably time to take a look. And then absolutely make sure that you're revisiting your mission, vision, values routinely. Are they still relevant? Do they still make sense? Is it still where the organization is going? And just making sure that you align those. Be transparent, because lack of transparency is certainly a cause for concern. Make sure that you're communicating with everyone within the organization. Educate people. And I'm not talking just staff training, but I'm talking about educating communities about what you do and about what best practices are. Talk to your other community partners and see what they're doing. How can you make a positive impact on your community at large? So people look to you as an expert. Make sure, we're CQL, we love our data. So make sure that you're gathering relevant data and then you're analyzing it and doing something with it. You're not just collecting it to have it sit on a spreadsheet or in a dashboard somewhere. What are you actually doing with that data? How is it moving your organization forward? And then make sure that your policies are actually aligning with your values. If one of your values is to ensure that people are exercising rights, do you have any policies that aren't promoting that? So looking at that alignment with the policies in your other systems along with the values. One of the most important things that you can do is include people. So we're going to spend a minute talking about that. And the reason we talk about including people, next slide, please, is to make sure that there are lots of different eyes in the organization, because those perspectives are so important. I'm not, talking about, there's more people, kind of performing that gotcha type function that sometimes happens within an organization, but meaningfully involving people. So you hear different voices and you have different perspectives from a group of people. So it shouldn't be this, you shouldn't just have the same person on every committee. You should try to, look within and outside of your organization for people to be involved with different parts of the organization. One way to do this is to encourage people to be involved in the development of policies and procedures. And I'm not saying every policy and procedure, because that is not possible. And often, policies are driven by regulation. So with those types of policies, like with an HR policy about, benefits or something, you may not want to get a bunch of different people involved, because those are all, very heavily driven by, insurance policies and things like that. So I'm talking policies that really impact people. So human rights committee policies or due process policies, reporting policies, things like that. Ensure that people are involved as members on your committees, especially human rights committees, because you do want that level of scrutiny and fairness of your due process procedures at your organization. So making sure that rights are being promoted and not restricted is key. And the more diverse committee you can have, the better for the organization. Making sure that people are involved in, all parts of staff development and hiring, so that people are building the relationships that they want to have to lead a successful life and the life that they want to lead. Make sure that you're asking for feedback on performance reviews, not just from the supervisor, but also from other people too. People receiving services, that's a key person. to get feedback for performance reviews. Peers, what do the staff's peers have to say? So making sure that feedback is, you're getting that from a variety of stakeholders. Look at staff matching to ensure those relationships. When you're when you're changing your organization, especially when you're adding or changing to your service lines, ask what people think about that. Do they think that you have the organizational capacity to do those, to make those changes, and to see what their ideas are? Some of the best ideas, come from people receiving services and DSPs. So making sure that you're looking to them for their thoughts on changes to the significant changes to the organization. And then, of course, you want to include people in board membership and other leadership positions. So some of the things that can happen when people are involved, and again, a variety of people are involved within the organization, those people are really making sure that the organization is upholding its core values, and making sure that they're staying on track with that alignment with mission, vision, and values, and the way the organization is working. They can ensure that person-centered systems and practices are being developed and sustained. Strategic planning, you absolutely want to make sure that people with lived experience are giving input into the strategic planning of the organization. Strategic planning also helps an agency be less reactive and more proactive. You, of course, want to model inclusion, to other stakeholders and other people in the communities in which you provide services. And then, of course, you're building trust with your stakeholders, which just makes your organization a lot stronger. And you're doing that through transparency and accountability by inviting people to be meaningfully involved in those different parts of the organization. So now Elizabeth is going to talk about different situations where there may be a red flag and how to turn those into green flags.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. So we're going to go through some common red flag areas through the lens of CQL's basic assurances factors. And we'll start with rights protection and promotion because this, as always, is the most important. And so some red flags in the area of rights, could be use of restrictions to control people without adequate due process and individualized justification. We never want to have a restriction in place on anyone where it's not individualized and it's not justified for that person's need. One of those things and a big thing right now is camera use. And so a red flag really is camera use for surveillance in people's homes. Now, cameras can be used for things such as remote supports to provide more independence to people. But a red flag really is cameras used for surveillance in people's homes. Cameras just placed in a home by an organization, by a family member, by whomever to surveil whomever that might be surveilling. So some practices that can be put in place to kind of keep those red flags from creeping in, including, enhancing oversight and monitoring of potential rights and restrictions, really ensuring that people know how to identify what a rights restriction or intrusive intervention looks like, and that's understood by all staff within an organization. And we're talking about, again, when we talk about rights, human, civil, legal, and service rights of people receiving services. Another thing is to strengthen human rights committee procedures. Ensure, like Catherine had said earlier, that there's a really good perspective on the committee. There's different people that can provide that variety of different perspectives that aren't employed by the organization, because we really want those procedures to be unbiased. Restrictions should be justified, again, individualized. They should be the least restrictive for a person, and they should always be time limited. And another thing that organizations should think about is how to collaborate with like-minded organizations. This just helps understand other organizations' systems and practices when it comes to any system, really, not just systems around rights protection and promotion. But, finding a like-minded organization to collaborate with can really just strengthen both organizations so you're not trying to figure things out on your own. CQL has developed a wonderful resource specific to camera use that's available on our website. It goes over a number of ethical questions and considerations when thinking about using cameras and services, and it's a beautiful document. It's a two-page infographic, and I really do highly recommend everyone check it out. It has a lot of good information in there on if you're even considering the use of cameras anywhere within your services. The next area is around dignity and respect. Some red flag areas within dignity and respect include widespread intentional use of derogatory or demeaning language referring to people receiving services. And when we talk about this as a red flag, we're not talking about isolated incidents. We're really talking about prevalence. We're talking, if we go into an organization and we see that this is consistently occurring across services, across area, across many staff. That's what we're talking about as far as red flags in that area. Additionally, a red flag might be just the general sense from people receiving services that they don't feel valued, that they don't feel heard by the organization, that they feel like their feelings are dismissed or not important. That really is a red flag because people should feel valued. They should feel heard. They're the customer. And everything that is done should be done for what's, needed by and for the customer. And remember with language, not all people prefer person first language. That's kind of the mantra we live by, but identity first language too is the language that some people prefer. So it's important to understand people's preferences when it comes to the language that they prefer to be used. As far as moving over to kind of some green flags, really the biggest things are just ensuring that external communication promotes dignity. It's not just about the language used in interaction, but it's about the written communications and the verbal communications that are on our website, if you have a website that are used in social media to describe people or to talk about services, are they dignified and do they show people in a respectful light? Also, follow the three E's as an organization. The three E's of experience, education, and exposure really help to ensure that people have choice in their life and the opportunity to make informed decisions. And that truly is a foundational element of dignity and respect, but just always following the three E's of providing experience, education, and exposure to the people receiving services. When it comes to relationships, a red flag in this area might be a lack of support for people to have meaningful relationships. Or the belief throughout an organization that people with disabilities can't or shouldn't have unpaid relationships. There's lots of data, lots of studies out there that show that people need relationships, that they really impact a person's life and their health, both physically and mentally. So a red flag really is just the lack of support within an organization for people to have relationships that are important to them. And that could be with neighbors, coworkers, peers, those not receiving services, but it goes beyond family as well. So what an organization will want to do is ensure that people being supported understand various relationships, that they help identify any barriers that a person might encounter in order to develop or maintain those preferred relationships. Also, people should be supported to, again, form and maintain friendships. It's not just about, again, family relationships, but about friendships and intimate relationships as well. And then a big part of this is just providing support through training or through assistance, such as transportation, help with phone calls or email, setting up social media accounts, writing letters or sending cards, any way that the person wants to develop and maintain relationships, that support should be provided. And that really can be used by anyone. There are no limitations. There's so many different ways to support people to have relationships. And that could, again, be relationships within their local physical communities or online communities if that's preferred by the person. As you might all know, protection from abuse, neglect, mistreatment, and exploitation, there are certainly lots of red flags that might pop up, which include, a failure to report allegations when they are made, regardless of who they are made by, a failure to fully investigate allegations, to do a thorough, unbiased investigation of any allegation that is made by anyone of abuse, neglect, mistreatment, or exploitation. Another red flag is failure to provide or even offer necessary medical or psychological follow-up to a victim. So it's important that there are victim supports in place or resources available that can be offered when a victim has encountered abuse, neglect, mistreatment, or exploitation. And then, of course, another big red flag is a failure to protect a victim from further harm. That should be the first thing that is absolutely done when there is an allegation is to protect someone from further potential harm. So, an organization's responsibility is really to explore a variety of methods and formats for reporting. It's not just about providing staff or an employees ways to report, but also a variety of methods for people receiving services to report when things are happening. Also, ensure that there's full supports to mitigate impact of abuse, neglect, mistreatment, and exploitation. We're, it doesn't matter who the perpetrator was, it doesn't matter when it occurred, but there should be supports that are provided. Now, of course, this will depend upon your services. If you only offer, say, day services or employment services or episodic services, you may just be offering resources to people should they choose to take it. Instead of being the one to get a person to say a counselor or a therapist or someone to talk through what they're experiencing and that trauma. Organizations should enhance their reporting and investigation procedures. This is something that organizations should always be looking at to see how they could do it better. How could it be enhanced? So ensuring really robust and reliable reporting and investigation procedures are in place. Also, ensuring that you are defining immediate responses to protect people from further harm. What will be done, and ensuring that everyone in an organization understands that. And then, of course, a great thing that any organization should be using is a trauma-informed approach to services, understanding that unfortunately many, many people with disabilities have experienced trauma from abuse, neglect, mistreatment, and exploitation in their life. So, helping staff understand the principles of trauma-informed support to services can be really, really beneficial to preventing any systemic issues in this area. As you can see, there's a lot in the area of best possible health. Lots of red flags might include people are not being provided or supported to access healthcare at all. And that includes psychiatric mental health care as well. It might be inadequate monitoring, oversight, or support for people. If people aren't getting the support, aren't getting what they need as far as their health, no one's there to monitor or kind of see what's going on for people. That could be a red flag. If staff or people supported require permission prior to contacting emergency services, that could be a potential indicator of a red flag as well. Really, no one should have to require permission to call 911 or whatever the emergency system is in place in that state or country or whatever it may be. So people should not require permission to contact emergency services when there is an emergency. A red flag might be necessary or appropriate medical intervention or follow-up is not being provided, either at all or in a timely fashion. So when there has been the necessity for follow-up from an appointment or an emergency room visit, or a person is having an acute illness, if people are not getting follow-up care reasonably or in a timely fashion, that very well could be a red flag, definitely if it's happening systemically. And then lastly, systemic use of medications for staff convenience or administering any medication inconsistent with the prescribed or intended purpose. Sometimes if somebody, say a staff is giving someone Benadryl to try to get a person to go to sleep because they don't want to, unfortunately, have to deal with, for lack of a better phrase, that person after a certain time, rather than really trying to understand if the person is having a hard time sleeping, what needs to change. Do they need a medication or do they just need an environmental change? So that could really be an indication of a red flag. So, what should be happening is healthcare evaluations, screenings, and changes to a person's health should be documented in their records, whether that's a physical record or an electronic health record. It should be documented. There should be an effective system to monitor people's health care. How do we ensure that appointments are being done, that medications are being reordered, that what needs to happen is happening? Which leads to, of course, there should be a system for evaluating reporting and response procedures to ensure that there's timely follow-up. Organizations should really be working with people to empower them to direct and manage their own healthcare as much as possible. People should be actively involved rather than passive recipients of healthcare. Some people may want to be more actively involved with others, and that's than others, and that's okay. But people really should be actively involved as much as they want in in the direction and management of their own healthcare. And then lastly, it's important to ensure that any restrictive healthcare supports, like any behavior modifying medications, are provide adequate due process to ensure that they're just not being used for staff convenience and that there truly is a need and all other non-medication methods have been tried and maybe have failed or maybe just need a little support through the use of a medication. So, red flags in the area of safety might include lack of identification and knowledge of risks to people. So, organizations should have an understanding of safety risks, both for the person, but also what people are concerned about when it comes to safety. It's not just about what a team or other people have identified as risks, but what the person has identified for themselves as well. Red flags might be that safety or hazard concerns have not been addressed, not been corrected. So it's always good to maybe do a root cause analysis to find out what's going on. What are safety hazards? What are other concerns that may be going on? Lack of typical safety devices or measures that a person would need. So not having a wheelchair that's in good condition when a person needs that, or grab bars or a wheelchair ramp to get into a home, or having lots of steps in a home where a person has accessibility needs and it's difficult for them to get around the home. Those could be indicators of red flags and when they're not being addressed. Lack of typical safety devices or measures, of course, like we just said, and then inaccessible emergency medications or devices. We don't see it as much anymore, but one thing that we used to see routinely is first aid kits that are locked up. And it took a while for people to get to. Or EpiPens that might be locked up under 3 locks that are very difficult to get to. Those things need to be readily available should people need them, especially when their life depends on it. So organizations really should, work to implement internal safety inspection systems. They should be routine. There should be a good, robust system in place for follow-up from those inspections as well when concerns are identified. Make sure that loop is getting closed. Organizations should develop and implement individualized safety plans. It should be about what each person needs for them, not just general safety, that's important, but also the individualized safety needs for each person. And then, of course, environmental modifications should be in place when needed by a person. So that's why the identification and the knowledge of those things is extremely important. With positive services and supports, some red flags in this area. A lot of these align closely with those that we spoke about in rights protection and promotion. Um, the first one really, though, is around the consistent lack of involvement of people in their own planning process. The planning process really is a big part of planning a person's life, planning for the person's life and their services. So if there's a consistent lack of involvement of people receiving services in their own planning, that is a red flag because people that's basic dignity and respect as well. Other red flags include use of seclusion, floor restraints, those supine and prone restraints, putting people on the floor in 3-point, 4-point restraints, corporal punishment of people, or adverse and noxious stimuli being used with people and having that be allowed within an organization to be used as a punishment. There might be other highly restrictive and intrusive procedures without justification and without intentional efforts to fade to less restrictive supports. That's really is a red flag when there are just highly restricted procedures like cameras without justified use and without efforts to fade those to less restrictive supports. Use of psychotropic medications for behavior control is a red flag when there is no informed consent, there's no due process, there's no information being given, being monitored by the organization to understand if that medication is truly needed. This often looks like behavioral data tracking within organizations, but there needs to be that justification and all the things that go along with unbiased due process when psychotropic medications being used for behavior control. Another red flag is the use of PRN or as needed psychotropic medications without clear guidance for when they are to be given, especially if the reliance is on staff giving them to people. It's different if a person can come to a staff and indicate I need this right now. I am feeling anxious. I am feeling whatever that feeling is for that medication. That's different. But when the reliance is on staff to make the determination on when to give them, there really needs to be clear guidance for when those are to be given. Very clear parameters need to be in place. So with this area, Organizations should really ensure that individualized plans really lead to person-centered and person-directed services, ensuring that as much as possible, people are in the driver's seat of the development and implementation of their plans. And we understand that when it's an external entity that writes the plan, it makes it a little bit more difficult. The organization can still work very hard to advocate with and for that person, to be as much in control of that plan as possible and to choose their goals and realize their goals. Another thing that an organization should do is provide robust, ongoing employee training related to positive behavior supports, related to trauma-informed supports, and individualized plans. This should be robust. It should happen at intervals that are frequent enough for people and staff to really be able to express what needs to be done, what is allowed, what is not allowed, what should be happening, and what should not be happening. And then, of course, develop systems to determine when and how as needed medications are administered. So if you are an organization that uses PRN psychotropic medications for behavioral control, um, it, we often suggest that this isn't the best use of PRN meds. They should be related to a mental health diagnosis. But there should always be a system in place with clear guidance for when those types of medications are to be given. The last area that we're going to talk about is continuity and personal security. So some red flags in this area might be lack of access to basic technology, just even the basic iPads or tablets or just phones, cell phones, whatever it is, whatever people want and need, communication supports. Especially, if people don't use words to communicate. What are those communication supports? They need to be in place. They need to be effective. And this includes interpretation and translation services for those that need those services. And then lastly, really a lack of sound fiscal practices. That is a red flag when there's no system for budgeting or accounting for people's money, or there's a commingling of funds from um, everybody that receives services or everybody within a home, or if the organization is small and there's an owner and there's a commingling of owners' personal funds to the funds of the people receiving services, these are all major red flags. So an organization should really, things that help with these are strong mission and vision in place that really reflects the organization's core values and desired culture, ensuring that people have ways to communicate with other people. That's a big part of being able to use your environments, is just having the communication supports in place to be able to do that. And then, of course, make sure that there's a budgeting and accounting system in place. This, of course, will look different with every organization, depending on size, depending on, the amount of employee resources that you have. But ensuring that there is a budgeting and accounting system in place is extremely important. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine, who's going to talk to us about how red flags such as these might impact an organization.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great information. So we just spent 44 minutes talking about red flags and what you can do about them. Some of the impacts that these red flags could have on an organization if left ignored and if not changed to green flags. Some of the things that can happen are, your stakeholders just aren't going to trust you anymore. They're not going to trust your expertise. They're not going to trust that you're living your mission. And you certainly don't want that to happen. Certainly, it could damage your reputation. It's so, so important for organizations to build a positive reputation because, unfortunately, bad things happen to good organizations. So you want to make sure that, you have a good reputation to start with. So don't ignore those red flags so those bad things don't happen. You may have to go through some additional scrutiny from regulating bodies or other oversight bodies. You certainly never want the federal CMS people to come in or anything like that to scrutinize the organization, or in the US, the intermediate care facility people to come in um, to do some heightened scrutiny either. So you may have some increased oversight by those organizations. You may have to do more frequent reporting. You may have to do some additional activities. You could have, other organizations that could come in and really focus on the things that are unfortunately going wrong in your organization, instead of those things that could be that you should be focusing on that are going really well. You could lose funding, and we don't want any of those to happen. It could also impact your accreditation in a few different ways. If there are some red flags at your organization that are, going unchecked or unaddressed, you may not be granted accreditation. Your accreditation could be revoked. It could also change to a probationary accreditation or a provisional accreditation, where you would have further consultation with CQL and further communication with CQL to ensure that you're getting back on the right track. We have always been adamant that we meet organizations where they're at. There are times, though, where an organization may not achieve accreditation, or accreditation may be revoked because of significant issues that arise either during a visit or outside of a visit. And, our values are no longer aligning. That does happen. Thankfully, it does not happen very often because we have such great partners that really do want to provide better lives for people. Next slide, please. So here, we just want to really come full circle and talk about how we can, just a recap of some of the things that you can do in general to make sure those red flags either turn to green and remain green. Again, a strong mission, vision, values based on best practice and through the advice of people with lived experience. Be honest about your roadblocks. During an opening meeting of an accreditation, often during a planning meeting for an accreditation, we want to know what your challenges are so our staff can come prepared with some best practice ideas from other organizations, some resources for you. So, another way to be transparent is to be open and honest about those roadblocks. What are the challenges? What's stopping you from doing the great things that you really would like to do? Ensure you've got the right people on the bus. If your organization is going one way and, really progressing and embracing best practice, and you have some that just aren't there yet, what are you doing to get them, on board? Or is it, maybe time for some people to get off the bus? Are they holding the organization back? That the self-reflection an organization can do is critical as organizations evolve, and making sure that you've got the right people in the right position at the right time. Make sure that you're providing relevant competency-based training so that the training is actually improving services. Clearly we all have training that we have to do. CQL2, has training that we have to do every year because we want to make sure that we're up on all of the standards, especially when it comes to things like HIPAA and, different types of, right now, CQL is doing cybersecurity training. So, that training is really relevant because not only does it, hone our skills, but it also gives us tools to use with other organizations. So making sure that your training is relevant and timely is key. And then again, really make sure that you're including people in a meaningful way. So not just as tokens or just you can say, oh yeah, we have a parent on this committee. Make sure that that parent is meaningfully involved and is welcome to the committee and that they're being heard and their input is being heard. So, that inclusion, that closing the loop at your organization is just going to make you stronger. You want to make sure that you're establishing very clear expectations. And along with those expectations, some accountability. How are you going to hold people accountable for meeting your expectations? Don't avoid the problem. Don't bury your head in the sand. It's very important to, face those challenges with integrity and best practice. Creating a culture of trust is definitely key. If people don't trust you, they're not going to be very good for your organization. So make sure that you are acting in a trustworthy manner at all times and that people believe what you say because you actually act upon it. Make sure that you're really rewarding and celebrating the changes that you're making, whether they be big or small. A change can be really small and still have a huge impact. Make sure that you're celebrating those, that you're sharing those success stories. We encourage agencies to celebrate their accreditation, before as we're leaving our organization. And we really mean that we want those celebrations and that recognition to occur because it is much, much more motivating for most people and most organizations to celebrate than to be scolded for something that they're doing wrong. And that also can help support a work-life balance, believe it or not. If you're celebrating and you're taking breaks and you're meaningfully including people are going to have a better work-life balance. They're not going to feel, like all they do is work and that they never get to spend time with their families. Making sure that you give staff the time and the resources to be able to live a life outside of work. That's very, very important. You're going to have much less turnover. People are going to be happier, and it will definitely impact in a positive way the organization as a whole. So as we conclude our webinar for the day, we want to make sure that you sign up for our emails. We've got some really, really great resources on our website. And Seth has already dropped a lot of those resources into the chat box. And again, you don't have to save or bookmark all those. They will be sent to you along with the webinar recording. And then, of course, we want you to connect with us. These are all of our social media sites. Our e-community continues to be a great resource for our partners. People go on there all the time and ask for feedback. They ask for resources. They share resources. It's a wonderful opportunity for people. And of course, you could always reach out to Elizabeth or I directly for any questions at the email that you see on your screen. So now we're going to bring back Seth to see if we have any questions from our audience.
We don't have any questions quite yet, but I'll give people a minute or two to enter those in if they have any. While people are doing that, I'll just kind of give a refresher of what Catherine had just said about the webinar recording and a PDF version of the presentation slides, as well as all those chat links. Those will be sent out to all registrants of this webinar in probably about 2 weeks, so be on the lookout for that. And just because I can't help myself, I'm going to give a shameless plug for the 2025 CQL conference, which I'm sure you've received some communications about. That is coming up in mid-October, so October 13th through the 16th. I'm going to put a link into the chat box for that. We're happy to host over 20 breakout presentations, over 20 exhibitors, 40 plus presenters, 5 keynotes. So it will definitely be a very valuable experience for you all. So we encourage you to sign up and join us if you haven't already. Looking at the Q&A box, I still don't see any questions, which always tells me that our presenters covered absolutely everything that could have ever been covered related to the webinar topic. You guys hit it out of the park, I guess. But like Catherine and Elizabeth had said, always feel free to reach out to us directly if you have any questions or need any assistance. Other than that, look forward to connecting with you all, hopefully in October and in future webinars.
Exciting. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.